about what are the key kind of discussions that are happening with regards to Common Core and how you might become aware of them if you're not already, and how you might start being proactive into that process. As you know, the Common Core are becoming a key element of it despite all the political and challenges. It's been established in 45 states in the nation right now, and there's many new initiatives that are happening connected to Common Core. I want to point out in the next slide some of where it came from, right? This whole business with standards started in 1989. With the first movement into the standards, you might recall that in music education, the national standards that NENC, then NENC, now NAFME, established, came out in '94. But these, you know, is a cycle connected to No Child Left Behind, RRTT, the Race to the Top initiatives, and now the Common Core. I think that one of the key things that we need to think, and one of the key things that we can do with this process right now, is to connect the kinds of things that are the kind of big policy ideas. You know, how do we prepare students for college work? How do we understand the sense of consistency throughout the nation, given that we have a lot of transiency in many aspects, in many parts of the country. Right, students are moving from place to place, and how we can create a sense of the standards that are not simply kind of the punitive kind of standards that are very high-stake, task-based, but something that is more integrated into the lives and the structures of teachers, right, and structures of schools. So next slide. I think that one of the important things is that the focus that many of the proponents of Common Core and the way in which this is going to be implemented in the next few years is a key aspect, and our participation in that process is key as well. If we are able to articulate to principals, to peers, to kind of the institutions in general, how and in what ways we as teachers have a significant role to play in that process, I think that that's going to make or break the way in which the Common Core gets operationalized, right? One of the things is to have the idea. The other things is how this idea comes into the lives of teachers and the lives of students. I think that the idea that not showing what but not how, it's really key, and the how, it's really articulated in that process of the Common Core to be delegated to us as teachers, and I think that this is really a significant aspect. I'll tell you a story that is an interesting story. The state of Tennessee. Tennessee was the first state to receive part of the $4 billion that the federal government allocated for the Race to the Top. And part of that process was the establishment of, you know, as you know, teacher evaluations, many of which were connected directly to Common Core. Tennessee started with a flat 50% evaluation connected to other tests in other areas, but now has really changed because of the influence of teachers' unions, because of the influence of conversations with key districts, because of the conversations with teachers, shifted now to, for instance, a portfolio kind of structure in which teachers select student work and put together a process in which their evaluation is directly connected to their own teaching. There's a major gain there in change in Tennessee, and it's a very important thing for us all to be concerned with and aware of. Next slide. I think that what is important is that we are aware of the issues, right? We do need resources to move that process forward. We need instructional materials that are pertinent, including those that we can develop ourselves. We need to think about the idea of assessment and how that's being proposed here. FMEAs are a great opportunity to go to some of these sessions, talk to people in leadership. And we need to be thinking, obviously, in terms of policy that are developed by the district. And that's one of the reasons we're so glad to have a strong partnership with Miami-Dade, is how we can help that process be thought. But we need to contribute to that process as individuals, as part of the kind of work that we're doing daily in our classrooms. Next slide. One of the things that we're going to see here is I think there's three important focuses in kind of the change in which how we might think about what we do in a daily basis in our classrooms. The first one is the focus on high participation and interaction with students. right? The idea of fostering reflection and getting students to talk about the process. The processes that happen within our rehearsals, the process that happen within our general classrooms. But this idea of fostering high participation is really key. The second one is this idea of complex and rich text. There's not just text in a written text, but there's also musical text, visual text. Those are the kinds of things that we can do on a daily basis in our classrooms to help to create kind of creative ways, the ideas of how do we locate, infer, connect, compare. These are the kinds of things that we are, by the way, trying to connect and get every single one of these workshops that we're doing throughout the year. We're talking to people and thinking about how do you position yourself in that? How do we do that when we're thinking about the band rehearsal, when we think about choral rehearsal, when we think about composition in the classroom, when we're thinking about new ways of dealing with the elementary kind of methods that we have and developed. And the last one is this idea of formative assessment. You know, how do we participate? How do we create an environment in which feedback is a constant element? Those, I think, and I'll stop right here, and Brian will come in and talk a little bit more about specifics of how this gets implemented, kind of the specifics with the language that's already in place. But I would like you to remember those three elements. These are things that we can start doing today, right? Start thinking and framing what we do in the classroom based on this. And this kind of process can have a big impact in conversations with peers, with supervisors, with principals, and demonstrating how you do that, how you're thinking about that process, and how you're bringing that into your own classroom.
So there's a couple different ways we can enter the Common Core. We can take note of where they actually talk about music and the arts within the Common Core document, and we can find places where what we do intersects with the Common Core. So, for instance, describe how words and phrases, regular beats, alliteration, rhymes, repeated lines supply rhythm and meaning in a story, poem, or song. This is a Common Core. This is a reading. This is one of their reading standards. So this absolutely speaks to what we're doing. Analyze the representation of a subject or a key scene in two different artistic mediums, including what is emphasized or absent in each treatment. So for instance, we can think about the national anthem as rendered by the Marine Band or the Texas Cuties, for instance, and a rendition by Jimi Hendrix, and ask the question, who gets to play the national anthem? Which one counts, and how does it count, or does it not? Next slide. Here's the thing. This is how we absolutely can enter this conversation. If the definition of text may be expanded to include non-print text, such as works of dance, media arts, music, or theater, then every single one of the reading language standards in the Common Core pertain to us. We just need to change the language. So in the next slide, for instance, cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. We do this all the time in the choral. When we think of text, the literacy-based text. We ask students to think this way all the time. If we think of a piece of music that we're programming, we can ask our string students and our band students to think of this as well. But we're thinking about the musical aspects of the text, of the musical text. Determine a theme, right there, that speaks to us already, right? Determine a theme or central idea of a text and analyze in detail its development over the course of the text. We do this all the time. We just need to recognize that we do this all the time so that when we have conversations with our principal, we can tell them that we're doing these kinds of things. Include how it emerges and is shaped and refined by specific details. Again, we do this in choral rehearsals and we do this in band rehearsals. We just need to make note that we do this. Next slide. Determine the meaning of words and phrases as they're used in the text, including figurative. So, for instance, if we jump down, how the language, the music, evokes a sense of time and place, how it sets a formal, informal tone. We just have to have these phrases ready to go. Analyze how composers' choices concerning how to structure a text again meaning music, order events within it, for instance, theme, variation, form, and manipulate time, rhythmic structure, form, dynamics. How that creates effects as mystery, tension, or surprise. That's us. So, last slide. This is the thing, we have to use the language that everybody's using. And we just have to use it deliberately because this is a shared responsibility. Common Core is asking us to take responsibility K-12, all school settings, all disciplines. So, if we just are very specific about the language we use with students and ask our students to use, This is a huge part of addressing the Common Core. So when we ask students to cite cite is a word that comes up all the way through the Common Core standards. Cite specific examples in the text, the piece of music. Determine a theme. Determine is a Common Core word. Analyze. Draw evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'd like you to draw evidence from this piece of music. These are phrases we need to use. Support your points and your partners' points. Integrate and evaluate, demonstrate understanding, describe, students please describe, provide, and here's the thing, we need to figure out how to provide time to reflect, to talk to each other in the space within the classroom so that students have time to talk about these things. And that's the challenge for us, because we're programming and we're thinking about the musical structure, and to step back and say, okay, let's just take a few seconds to think about what we're doing and afford that space in the classroom for that kind of discussion. But these are words, and we'll make these PowerPoint slides available to you. But if we start using this language, we're there actually. We can talk to our partners in crime in the K-12 situation.
Okay, so as I get older, I have to bring notes with me. So, next slide. So what I wanted to talk to you about, since she covered some of the benchmarks that occur in elementary, is to talk a little bit about the benchmarks that occur on the secondary level, since that's where I spent most of my work. But above all, trying to integrate the Common Core into our classrooms is going to be about you having a conversation with your students. So if you are teaching band, it's not about, okay, come in, unpack your instruments, sit, take out the music and play. We rehearse, the bell rings, you're done. There needs to be some kind of a communication back and forth with your students about the work that they are doing, just like I would have hoped that many of your college experiences were like. And so you are kind of covering a little bit of theory and history through the music in your rehearsal. And in turn, that makes them a better musician because they have a better understanding of what's happening. So here from the craft and structure cluster, determining the meaning of symbols, key terms, and other domain-specific words. You can read up on the board. This is about, we have tons of symbols to discuss with them. We have our sharps and our flats and our clefs and the repeat signs and phrase markings and dynamics, and then what does that mean? There was a time when everyone was made to have a word wall, which I'm sure you remember that. But then what did we do with that word wall? Did we have a conversation about, okay, great, these are the musical terms we are using, and what does that mean? Allegro, andante, accelerando. Do we know that accelerando translates to becoming faster? So that is something that we have to then engage the students in actually taking a look at the text that they have and decoding it, because now you're also covering foreign language, of course. And then if you are a choral teacher, you're even covering a whole range of languages that you could be using. Even just our tuning, do your students understand why we are tuning at A440 and the frequency of what that means, vibrations per second? And do they get that? And so now there's an opportunity to pull some science into how sound is created and how instruments create sound in general. And it's important for students to have a total understanding of music, not just simply coming in and rehearsing. And then as far as for symbols, even too with our phrase markings and how that can really relate to poetry and the use of commas in literature is what our phrase marking is, whether it's then for you to breathe or to identify different things within the text. I also just wanted to make you aware that we do have a dance standard in your course descriptions on the secondary level: sustain focus, attention, respect. This is just a classroom management benchmark, really, but it's a great way to go through concert etiquette and classroom etiquette, and you're covering a dance benchmark. Next slide. Great. Okay, so draw evidence from informational text to support analysis, reflection, and research. So this could be a time to present information on the composer of who you're doing. So many times, again, this is not about just having, I'm watching my time, about just having just a rehearsal. It's about going deeper into the music. If you're doing a piece in orchestra by Vivaldi, do they know who Vivaldi was, that he was Italian, that he wrote the Four Seasons, that he's from, that he was born in 1678? Do they have these major backgrounds and knowledges? And then again, as Ms. Benedict said, using music composition as the text, that we can analyze and reflect choices that were made, also chord progressions, musical form, the vocal text, all of that is a way that we could look at the music and draw evidence from that text. Present claims and findings, sequencing, I'm on the next benchmark. Listening, logical speaking, and listening are the easiest benchmark for us to cover because it is just about having an intellectual conversation with your students and them being able to listen to the information you're giving and to speak it and give it back, determining the main idea of the piece of music and its purpose. All of that, you could talk about where are, the motifs of the piece. All of that kind of information is going to cover that benchmark. And because the point of this is that so that when your administration comes in and asks about you and Common Core, this is the language that you need to go back and talk about. Yes, you're talking to the brass section about their dynamic markings and what does that mean, but so right now you're talking about vocabulary. Can the students respond in sentences to you? And that will be covering the speaking and listening portion of your benchmarks, and then in turn you have the correct language to give to your administration. Next slide. Present information, findings, support evidence. Clearly you can read. Okay, so no sense in me reading the whole thing, right? So this could be an informal assessment through dialogue on anything. And a way for you to say at the beginning of your class, you could review the meters of the piece, the key signatures of the piece, so that it is knowledge that you have pre-taught and that now you are going to be accessing from the students to demonstrate that they have this presentation of knowledge and the main ideas of what's happening within the piece. Again, we have another dance, benchmark that does come in. Demonstrate effective teamwork, accountability, using compromise, collaboration. This is an ideal way to show when you do sectional rehearsals and sectional work in your room, this would be the benchmark that you are covering. It could also be something as simple as how classroom setup, and I've been in many schools where, okay, someone's in charge of taking the stands out or the chairs out. All of that simple stuff creates a teamwork and accountability for that teamwork, especially in the marching bands when you have leaders going on for section leaders and their tasks and responsibility. So again, it's about languaging. Last slide. Okay, so this is a K-12 benchmark. Mathematically proficient students look closely to discern a pattern or structure. So on the lower level, this would be just talking about scales and chords and beats per measure and the use of intervals. Do your students realize that Joy to the World is really just a scale being played up and down? Can they make that connection between this is a scale, this is the piece of music? Can we connect those two together? Proficient at keeping a steady beat and echo clapping, all of that would be covered in this benchmark. A sonata allegro form for the higher level students. Can they identify the ABA? Can they identify the pattern of a round or a fugue? Do they know what terrace dynamics is? Because that is yet another pattern of the Baroque style, right? So all of that is things that you do, or if not things that you will do, to begin to have that kind of conversation so that it's not just about the rehearsal and then you're leaving. It's about creating a well-rounded education. So when we were in, I'll speak to myself so I don't get myself in trouble. So when I was in college, right, I was able to take all of my performance groups and my private lessons and my theory class and my history class, and all of that was going on at the same time. Since our students don't take 8 periods with us, we have to cover as much as we can using the music and the pieces you have selected as the tool to teach as much as possible, so that they're getting a total music education. We cover, and by doing that total music education, it covers the standards automatically. These are just some things that I had pulled off, there's no slide, that made me think about different ways we can pose questions to students. So, asking students, why do we practice? Is there more than learning to play the right notes? What other aspects of music should we address to improve our performance? So, if the student has no prior knowledge of the time period or the correct way to practice, so many times teachers will say, okay, well, go home and practice that and come back. Well, does the student know how to practice? And so you have to really think about fundamentals and then layering that into the conversation in your class so that there is always a musical dialogue coming in, especially vocal teachers when you're teaching text of another language. Please make sure that they know what they're singing about, right? That we have translated that text and that process. That's sometimes I feel vocal choral music sometimes is an easier way to teach Common Core because you actually have a body of words to use and dissect and deal with. But we have to work on having that broader conversation in the classroom about everything that's going on, not simply just here's the music and go. Okay, so I'm now just about at time. This is something that I know that a lot of you do. Listen to recording of the ensemble's most recent rehearsal based on a given rubric, identify areas of superior performance and areas of need of improvement, right? This goes back to like the compare and contrast and Venn diagrams and all of that fun stuff. But it's again about having that conversation. So the reason why I wanted to present these benchmarks, there are more benchmarks obviously, and give you examples of what those benchmarks may look like in your classroom is so that you then can go and look through the benchmarks that relate to your course and figure out what are the kind of conversations you have. Even if your jazz show is performing, your marching band is performing a newly written piece or a piece constructed for you, that let's talk about the choices that composer made. And so yes, there is a decrease in rehearsal time because now you're allowing for dialogue. So I understand the pressure of having the music learned and going out on stage, but the overall education of the student will improve, and in turn their skills will improve by having more of a fundamental knowledge of what's occurring.